this workshop on autism is the first time in 5 national conferences that we have addressed this. This is terrific. We're just so glad and yes, that it worked out this way. So I want to make sure, and I used to have the notes right here, but I don't have them. Maybe here, maybe here.
Come on, Alan.
Oh yeah, okay. So we have here on my left first is Danielle Rochford, who is an advocate and a daughter of an advocate, and she tries to find humor in her disability. I asked her what she wanted me to tell you, so I'm not telling you what I'm just making up. She told me to do that. So that is Danielle. And Kim Newgass is the mother of a 26-year-old daughter who's on the autism spectrum. And for 23 years, since her daughter was, quote unquote, diagnosed when she was 3 years old, has been in 23 years in advocacy, program development, and works out of and during outreach with the Autism Society Connecticut. So we have 2 wonderful presenters here, and Danielle will lead on. And then we want to have time after Kim speaks, so we have some time for conversation as well. All right?
Great. Thank you.
We are glad you're here.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. To give you a little information about myself after Alan's information on me. I am a 28-year-old professional up in Burlington, Vermont. I was diagnosed with different disabilities when I was 3. I was diagnosed in 1989, which was about 5 years before the Asperger's syndrome ended up on DSM. So when I was diagnosed with language, arts, and speech disability, which obviously I've gone over a little bit, lack of fine motor skills, and dislocated hips. I had Kim aspiration in the womb, which meant that I was breathing in my own stool when I was born a month late. My mother had an HMO, and they refused to give her a C-section. So I was born a month late, and when I came out, I was having a stroke. So my adventure in autism had began about 5 months into my mother's pregnancy. So it's been something that I've been living with most of my life. But I was diagnosed in 4th grade with autism when it started becoming apparent that I was not socializing correctly. And correctly meaning social norms. I was not picking up on the don't stare at people while they're eating at lunch type issue going on. So it's been an interesting journey since then. And I kind of think I'm proof that not one size fits all when it comes to autism and support aids and different characteristics of autism. So today I'm going to be doing the first part of the presentation of equipping for effective ministries in the autism community. So I want just to get a feel of what people think, gut feeling, when they think about autism. And you can feel free to say whatever you want. This is a non-judgmental room, I hope. So does anyone have anything that they want to just toss out when they think of the word autistic?
For me, it's all trying to figure out how to communicate with persons I know who are living with autism on the spectrum, and I'm trying to figure out quote unquote language.
Yeah. Okay. So what autism is, as I had just mentioned, a group of complex orders of the brain development, which has recently been discovered happens in chromosome 15 with genetic mutations. There's a lot of developmental disorders that happen in chromosome 15, and recently have been discovered that there's a lot of mutations that happen in that chromosome. The cause of autism is still a puzzle. They really don't know exact root cause, but many view autism as partially genetic, situational, and environmental. So there are many factors that go into the potential risk of someone being born with autism. So there are 5 types of autism that is covered in the spectrum. There's Asperger's syndrome, which is high functioning with good verbal skills, but there's impairment in social interaction and function and use of language, and that's a very high functioning form of autism. There is autistic disorder, which meets the basic criteria in DSM-5, and function can vary from high to low. There is pervasive development disorder. Why aren't you coming up? Yeah. Which receives diagnosis if there's some characteristics, but it exists to moderate and high. There's Rett syndrome, which usually actually exists in females, and it's moderate to low functioning, and it's actually a very rare disorder that comes up. It's not usually found. And there's childhood disintegrative disorder, which affects toddlers and preschools, and there is a noticeable loss of language and social skills, and it's moderate to low functioning. And that's generally, these disorders come up about age 2 or 3, which is possibly why of all the surrounding controversies out there about what causes it, is because it's usually diagnosed at this point at age 2 or 3 when adults and parents are starting to notice things about developmental growth which aren't happening. And it's pretty obvious when there's a developmental growth issue in a child. But today, I'm at least going to just focus on the first 3 because that's where my expertise are focused on. And I want to give you the best idea about this without giving you any false information. So these are just the autistic types and which ones follow which functionality. There's different levels of functionality, and you're going to notice that if you talk to one autistic individual or another, no one is the same. And every functionality, no one is the same in that functionality. It's very much not a one-size-fits-all. It's a very much person-by-person situation and case-by-case. Hello. And types of autism, independence really varies, especially in adults. And it varies from person to person. There are people who are able to live on their own. I am one of those individuals who have lived on my own since I was 23. I do have supports in the area, but they are not everyday supports. They are supports that I've reached out to when I've realized that I just can't do it by myself. And then there are some adults, about 33% adults living with autism who are able to achieve partial independence. That may mean they are living at home with mom and dad or a caregiver or in a group home, and they have community support. So they may have a caregiver who goes out with them during the day, but they aren't with them during the night. They may have a support giver at work, but they may be able to function at home very well. It really depends on the person's situation. The other percentage of the adults with autism are often in group homes and often needing caregiving 24/7, and that really goes into the moderate to low functioning autism. Most high functioning autistics want to be out in the community, they want to work, some of them do work. It really depends on where their level is and how easy it is to find employment in that situation in that community. Only 1 in 4 individuals with a disability is working. There's a high unemployment rating in the disability community. and it's a major issue. So symptoms that are apparent in a church setting. Now these are symptoms, these are not the whole list of symptoms. These are symptoms that people would notice in a church setting if they spend, let's say, more than 10 minutes with someone. Passing is very difficult when you start to get to know someone. Nonverbal and verbal communication. Some individuals who are moderate to high functioning do not do verbal communication, or they're limited in verbal communication. With verbal communication, those with communication skills, there are sometimes an awkward situation of socializing. I'm not great with socializing still. There are times where I will stop in the middle of mid-sentence because I don't know what to say. It is very awkward, by the way, when you stop in mid-sentence and not know what to say. And then there's also the small chat aspect is very difficult for individuals. Saying, how are you? You will get their full life story in the past 24 hours. So how are you for someone who's neurotypical, meaning not having a developmental disability? How are you would say, I'm doing well. How are you? Someone asking me, I would tell them, well, I'm having a shitty day right now, and this is what's going on. And most people don't want to hear that at church. Hyper-focused topics. This is a big one. I'm lucky that one of my hyper-focused topics is religion and spirituality, but I also have hyper-focused topics in Excel and something else that I forgot off the top of my head, but my mother keeps pointing it out. But there's all sorts of different topics. Ponies, trains are a big one. Train times, when the train comes in, when the train comes out. And it's just a really mechanical, hyper-focused topic. It can be something as simple as different colors or different shapes. And it's really a theory of mind, which means they assume that everyone is thinking the same thing they are thinking, even though they aren't. But that's how they incorporate the world, is about them focusing on what their interests are and assuming everyone around them is focused on the same thing. Sensory processing is something that's really going to come up in church communities. Sensory issues is even a good example. Someone, and I'm not picking on Nadine, someone typing on a keyboard, not picking on you, keep going. That sound could bother someone because it's a sound that they're hearing and they don't know where it's coming from. If I was sitting up in the front row, I would probably be looking around to figure out who's typing right now, not because it's annoying, but because I really need to know where that sound is coming from. The lights can bother someone, music can bother someone. The smell of your cleaning product that you clean the floor with on Tuesday when you go into church on Sunday can bother someone. There's a lot of sensory issues, and when a lot of senses are awakened at that point, people can get overwhelmed, especially in the autistic community. And at that point, they may be overstimulated. They may be having a hard time adjusting to a new environment. So you may see some interesting, I guess people would call them quirks, either self-stimming, repetitive moving, such as fingers, leg shaking, foot shaking, and you're just needing to go to a quiet place. I know many churches in the New England area used to have a room called the wailing room, where they would take their kids if they were screaming. That would actually be an ideal space to make it a quiet room, especially during service, where someone could go and have that privacy of stimming by themselves. I personally play Plants Killing Zombies on my phone whenever I'm stimming at church, and it has gone some interesting looks at board meetings. Well, I'm going die, zombie, die. So I try to keep my stimming down to appropriate games on my computer that won't cause looks. Yeah.
They're just jealous because they haven't played that game.
Exactly. And then
Well,
all the little
obviously
kids
try
look
it.
at me and go, why are you playing if I can't play? There's a need for routines. I know that churches have sometimes, I know that my church has a lot of politicians who come and speak during our forums. Those days are crazy hectic at church. Youth Sundays are crazy hectic at church because I go in and I know the routine. So normally I would suggest if you're having a special Sunday at church and you have someone who likes routines, just mention it beforehand, a week or so beforehand, and go, this is what's going on. I understand if you're not comfortable with this. If you want to go to an earlier service that is not focused on this, you can. Because it really does mess up someone's routine when you go in and there's a camera crew in the back. And it's like, oh, look, there are people all over the place. Savant skills are something else that comes up. Anyone seen Rain Man in here? Okay. Rain Man would be a good example of a savant skill. He had a math skill. He could remember ball player statistics, telephone book, counting cards. That's a mathematical savant who can multiply and divide large numbers and square roots and prime numbers. But there's also memory, art, and music. And especially the last two, art and music, can actually come as a gift to the church, because I have met people who can remember perfect pitch and remember a classical music song after just hearing it once. I've seen beautiful artwork done by a lot of individuals. In memory, I'm recently joined a ministry school up in Vermont, and the first church history class, I remembered everything from World History 1 of connecting Plato with Socrates and what was mentioning in my church history class. So I had a flashback for the whole time going, oh wait, I already did this. Anxiety is a really big one too. New situations can scare a lot of people easily. And it can scare a lot of autistic individuals easily. It can really stress them out. There is a research study that has been done showing a very direct connection between stress and autistic symptoms. So if someone is more stressed out, you can see their symptoms a lot more than when someone is calm. And that can really affect Sunday service if a person is having something called a meltdown, which is basically an overstimulation moment where they cannot control themselves and they do not plan this, and they need to leave because they are just being so overstimulated that they cannot control what their body is doing. This can end up to some self-harm, although that's not as prevalent in adults now because of therapies that exist in their childhood and learning how to work through that. It can lead to walking, crying, screaming. For me, it tends to lead to walking and crying somewhere and having to disappear because I really don't want anyone to see me in that lovely moment of my life. And it usually actually knocks me out for about 3 days of all my energy. I really cannot do anything after that for about 3 days. So creating an accessible church. The creation of an accessible church, we think a lot about physical disabilities when it comes to a church community. We think about ramps. We think about handicapped accessible bathrooms. We think about hearing wires that deaf people can hear through. But we don't really think about the invisible disabilities such as autism or ADHD or any developmental disability that requires someone to sit down in a pew for over an hour each week. That's really difficult for a lot of individuals, even those without a disorder. They can fidget and look at their phone and move around. So creating an accessible church is key to ensuring that this is going to be a great experience for everyone involved. And it just takes one member. When I had joined my UCC church, I was still in the closet about autism. I don't like telling people that I'm autistic. First off, I'm a professional in my city, and it can really cut down on my job opportunities if someone knows I'm autistic. Because of the stigma around autism. It can really cut down on people taking me seriously. I joined a Bible study, and my associate minister realized that I had autism and did not mention it to me because she knew I was going to tell her in my own time. And I was asking very interesting questions during Bible study, such as Paul's view on following Roman laws. I asked her if it was okay for the Jewish Christians to have bacon. And talking to her about their eating habits, and she finally looked at me, she's like, yes, Danielle, back then if they had bacon, they could probably eat bacon if they were Jewish Christian and not following the Jewish beliefs. I'm like, okay. So I was very okay with that, but everyone at Bible study had looked at me going, why are you asking this question? It was important to me at the time to figure out if they could eat bacon. I can't tell you why, but it was important to me that morning. So when she had heard that I wanted to be in ministry, she had actually taken me under her wing and started mentoring me about different social interactions she was viewing. And I think at one morning I had said something, interrupted a conversation. She finally had mentioned this was not a normal social interaction, and really upset me because it was in a Bible study and there were people around. And at the end, she had let me know that after she had done 4 or 6 months of studying on this, that this was the only way she could help me, is by being clear, direct, and honest when she sees these things. By the way, this was a rift in our relationship for about 5 hours until I got over it. But it was a long 5 hours of me steaming about my mentor, who is now one of my closest friends and one of my best supporters. So what I have found that really helps is having a covenant in your church. And I know that covenant is a buzzword that we use a lot in church communities. And it's very important to have that covenant even with members, not just with your minister, because really that's how we follow our social norms in a church setting. And having that structure for someone with autism is very important, knowing that this is what's going to happen and that we have that relationship with each other. And the covenant can be between individual and minister, such as my own mentor. Come on. Creating clear boundaries and expectations. There is an expectation at my church that I know is there. There is an expectation that I'm not going to act out and start pointing fingers at her in front of 20 people going, I can't believe you did this to me last week. That's a boundary and expectation. But there are also clear boundaries of being able to socialize and not coming into church when I'm having a rough day, not coming into church when I'm having a meltdown, but also working and understanding that she's going to help me through this and she's going to try to work with me, but I need to work with her too. It's not just a one-way street. It needs to be both people working together to make this work out. Because church is not just about going there, it's about growing in that moment, growing in that social community that people often view as family. Direct communication. There's a lot of people who like to sugarcoat words or use different jokes, like, I don't remember one particular phrase, but it's a red herring that had been mentioned in my CPE course. And when I was asked what I had done to figure out that red herring, I had to look at my supervisor and go, well, I don't know, because I didn't know what red herring meant. I had just sat there and kind of cover-coded the conversation going, okay, I don't know why they're talking about a fish. Let's keep going. So direct communication, do not fluff it. because a lot of people, a lot of autistic individuals appreciate being told directly what is going on. They are not going to get pissed off at you if you say directly what you are feeling or what you need, because they really do want to know. And when they're trying to keep up with social cues, they aren't going to pick that up. Social cues are not something that we pick up easily. I don't know when someone's happy or mad at me. I have to actually talk to them and figure out what I did in the past 2 weeks to piss them off, because I literally do not know what I did in the past 2 weeks to piss you off. Many forms of communication. So a lot of people just use talking. I tend to email people after I have a conversation with them, especially close friends, to clarify what was said and what I picked up. Because I may walk away from the conversation with a completely different idea of what was said, and it may not be a good idea of what could be said. And I can let that steam overnight and get more pissed off over nothing. So I really encourage people to use that email communication. I know a lot of people hate email communication or a letter or art. When I was having a tough time, I started coloring mandalas and drawing pictures, and that really showed a lot of emotion and feeling about what I was feeling at that particular time. Come on. Mentoring and guiding, as I've been mentioning. It doesn't have to be a minister. It can be someone who's trusted in your community. It can be someone who has experience working with an autistic individual. It can be someone that they're very comfortable with, because it does help to have someone there pointing out your faux pas and social interaction. Not in a negative, mean way, but in a way of going, I know you're really trying to fit in. This is what I'm noticing. What's going on with you right now? Inclusion in congregational life. A lot of people notice at their churches that there aren't a lot of disabled people on their council, on leadership committees, and that's because of the perception of what the capabilities are. I strongly encourage people to include, even if it's just getting someone to hand out bulletins, because it's going to get them comfortable saying, "Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you?" And that was actually one of the things that I got assigned to by my mentor, was to hand out bulletins one summer, every single Sunday for 3 months. By the way, I was not happy for about a half of those months. I was very vocal in my distaste, but by God, she found me every single Sunday with a packet of bulletins going, "Time for you to hand out the bulletins today." So it's really, it's helping people get out of that shell and realizing what their expertise are. I come from a place where I have a business degree, where I do facilitation in groups a lot. And it's just now opening up where people notice that I do know how to talk in public without freaking out and running away and hiding. So congregation, individual, and minister. That's another covenant, because it's not just about you and the minister. It's about everyone in your congregation. It's about everyone in you. It's about, if you're not a minister, it's about everyone in your minister in the congregation. Create clear boundaries and expectations with fellow congregants. We like to hug. We are a hugging church. We are hugging monsters. I do not like hugs. At my church, I have one friend who is someone who likes to give hugs. He loves hugs. He's an 83-year-old retired Methodist minister who does not remember that I don't like hugs. Every single Sunday, he would give me a hug, and I would tell him, "Tom, I do not like you hugging." During a CPE supervisory meeting with my Jesuit priest supervisor who does not like hugs, I was explaining this to him. My mentor kept going, "He's 83. He's homeless. He just forgets." I finally got over it and realized I had to get used to it because he was not going to remember. God bless Tom. He was not going to remember that I don't like hug. It's been 2 years, and I am now trying to find him to give him hugs during Sundays. Accommodations for events and travel. So I don't know who has ever gone to a retreat for a weekend. You usually end up sharing a room with someone. That's not super awesome for someone who needs alone time. I definitely need alone time. So if you're going to an annual gathering, it does not cost a lot of money just to get a private room for that individual. There usually is a discount at your annual gatherings. So it's really thinking about what's happening for this individual, what she needs, not a whole socializing experience. Because when you give that accommodation, I reassure you that individual will want to socialize even more. Last annual gathering, I spent very few hours in my room because I knew I had my own room, and I was out socializing for 12 hours. I was a social butterfly. Ensuring that fellowship hour is safe for everyone, and that goes back to hugging and understanding about communication. It goes back to knowing that, people should go up and talk to this individual instead of going, well, she really does not understand what I'm saying. I don't want to talk to her. It's about encouraging that information to move forward. Providing opportunities for growth and education. If there's a misunderstanding, it's great to talk about it. I had a meltdown in front of about 10 females in my church during a retreat, and it was viewed that I was going to act out violently. I will tell you that I'm not a violent individual. I would never hurt a fly. The most I do is throw my teddy bear up against the wall because I'm pissed off and I need something to throw, and Teddy seems like a safe option for me. So when I heard that, I had to actually advocate for myself, email the staff member who had said I was going to act out violently with my mentor in CC and explain this to her. That was a good educational moment. My staff member is now one of my biggest supporters, and she often advocates for me also. So that's a good way of reaching out and educating staff members who have never had to deal with this situation before, because it is something that's becoming new. Since 2010, I believe the statistics are 1 in 68 now? 1 in 68 children. And in adults, that's a little odd to figure out because before 1980, I think, right, most adults ended up in an institution. And that is the backstory of we don't want to get into these institutions. That's not happening as much anymore, but it is still happening for very low functioning individuals. Encouragement and communication, as I've already mentioned down the list. So, pastoral care boundaries are important. Yep. 5 more minutes. Yep. Awareness of what supports the individual can turn to. Some individuals I have vocational rehab. My vocational rehab is I have an employment consultant, I have a counselor, I can go talk to them if I have employment issues. I've had a therapist in my past because my minister is not my therapist. If there's something that she is not able to help me with, she refers me to my therapist. But she also knows that there are certain things that she can help me with. An awareness of what you're capable of. So if that is your expertise of helping to find meaningful employment, good for you, share that gift. If it's not your expertise, that's fine. No one is expecting you to be a dream worker. Your autistic friend is not expecting you to be a dream worker. She knows you're not perfect. She's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And assumptions. This is my last point. Do not make assumptions on autistic individuals. Because when you do make assumptions, there's an old saying, when you make assumptions, you become an ass. I believe that's the saying. It may be a few words missing right there. So when you make assumptions, it tends to turn out not good. because usually your assumptions are wrong. And then it's awkward trying to apologize to someone because no one likes to apologize for anything. I don't like to apologize for anything. So I believe that's the end of mine.
I have
Please.
2 questions.
Yeah.
First of all, so you know where I'm coming from. I'm a computer programmer, right?
As you just saw, yeah.
So my question has to do with diagnostic and troubleshooting.
Okay.
I have a person who's autistic coming into my church, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I, 1, recognize that, or should I? And 2, how do I discover what needs there are?
If the person has been, I think we can actually talk about this during our question segment. Yeah,
If we're going to talk about this
yeah,
later,
we're gonna
we
have
can wait.
Q&A. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't want to take.
No, I was gonna say, if you want to answer the question, go ahead and answer.
Oh,
the question.
okay. I just don't want you.
We can be very informal
Oh,
here.
okay. If the person's close to you, like very close, and you have a good relationship, you can ask what's going on. Not any way of finger pointing, going, I think you're autistic, but just going up and going, hi. I've been noticing this, and I was wondering, is this normal for you?
So, if somebody's coming to my church,
Yeah.
I'm going to make the assumption that I don't know them.
Yeah.
I'm meeting them for the first time.
Yeah. If you do know the person and they're coming to your church and you have a good relationship with them, feel free to talk to them.
Okay.
And when you talk to them, they may tell you their needs in the non-direct way. They may go, wow, I'm really struggling with this. They cannot sometimes tell you exactly what they need. That is not something that
Right.
they are really built to be able to do. But in other ways, such as myself, I know how to advocate for my needs. I am 28. I have had to advocate for 25 years of my life. And I'm very vocal, as Alan can assist, on what my needs are and when my needs are not being met. So I'm going to let Kim take it from here.
Thank you.
And yeah, and Kim's going to be talking about childhood autism and parenting.
Actually, Danielle, what a great job you did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Close that one out and we'll open this one up. Okay, so there's you'll notice there'll be a little bit of overlap, but what's really interesting is that the way that Danielle presents things and the way that I present things, it's like we're coming at these from 2 different positions. Now, because I'm a mom, I've got that piece of it, and I've seen my daughter, who is now 26, and I keep on saying, my gosh, wasn't I just pregnant? But that she has really been a tremendous learning instrument for me. I've also, once she was diagnosed, got very heavily involved with the autism community, the Autism Society of America, and with the large autism community here in Connecticut. Autism Services and Resources Connecticut is the agency that I work with. So when my daughter was first diagnosed, like most moms, you get into the why me. And I think I did the why question for about a week. And then I started asking the what question. What am I supposed to do with this? And, hello, there we go.
Yeah, it's tricky.
So my first piece here is the why are we here? And I understand from what's been going on in this session for the past couple of days is that you've really been getting ramped up about how important the faith community can be to those with, we're going to say disabilities, I'm going to say differently abled persons, because we're really talking about people that we're learning how to interface with in a different way. So who remembers, without looking at your notes, what the old slogan for Hebrew National used to be? Why they're as good as they are.
No buts about it.
We answer to a higher authority. Okay? You have no idea over the past 10 years how many times I have had to go to a congregation and say, guys, you really need to be paying attention to the disability community because, hello, we answer to a higher authority. And it's in the book.
Right.
When my Jewish colleague and I do our faith community presentation, we talk about her side of the book and my side of the book. And it's like, well, it's in both sides of the book. You need to, get this. So speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. So when I started asking the what question, guess what I found? When we're talking about those that are destitute these days, we're talking about disenfranchised communities. And that's really what the autism community, what the disability community is, a broader community, but what the autism community in particular has. And here's some of the backup for that. There was a survey that was done, let's say it was in 2012, among church-going persons. That say they have changed place of worship because your child was not included or welcome. 67% no, 33% yes. Have refrained from participating in religious activity because your child was not included. 53% yes, 47% no. Kept a child from participating because support was not provided. 56% no, 44% yes. We still have some work to do here, obviously. Oops, wrong one. Okay, so again, Danielle's definition of what is autism, complex developmental disabilities that are neurobiological in origin, impacting typical development of the brain. That's a great piece of gobbledygook, and basically what that means, and I've heard this identified by another adult on the autism spectrum, and he says, I'm creatively wired. So you can take that wonderful paragraph there and say it's creative wiring. And diagnosed on the basis of behavioral and developmental features. And here's where understanding what what goes into making an autism diagnosis. There will be some degree of impairment in social interactions. Again, Danielle gave you some great examples of that. In communication, and that can be all the way from nonverbal to non-understanding the social cues to not really getting how communication is used. If you're using reciprocal language, which is if I say something and then you say something back to me, and that's generally how a conversation goes back and forth, kind of like a tennis match. So there's volleys back and forth. That's how we use language to communicate. That's something that has to be taught, which is really tricky. And behaviors. So you have to have some degree of impairment in each of those areas in order for it to be an autism diagnosis. And that can be any place on the spectrum at this point. Just to augment what Danielle said, the Asperger's syndrome PDD or PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is what they give you as a diagnostic category when they're not sure which category you fit in. My daughter was in that category. And then autism. My personal philosophy is that the media could not say developmental disorder or pervasive developmental disorder, which the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM that Danielle referred to, which is the manual that the medical professionals use to actually do the diagnosis. That was the umbrella term up until the DSM-5, when now it's called either autism or autism spectrum disorders, because the media couldn't say I can't even say it, pervasive developmental disorders without tripping over their tongue, so it's now just become autism. And there are a lot of communities, the Asperger community in particular, doesn't like the fact that it's all now just autism, because there are a lot of very high-functioning vocal people in the Aspie community who are really unhappy with that. Currently impacts 1 in 68. For the first time, however, this statistic changed this year. 5 boys to 1 girl. It has been 4 boys to 1 girl for forever. And I think it's statistically interesting that Danielle, being a girl, obviously, and I have a daughter, how did we do that? We should be talking about 2 boys. Brain and neurology based with a lot of sensory processing components to it, not psychological, okay? It's also not a disease, it's not something you can catch, it's a disorder. Creatively wired, I explained before. To get an understanding of the concept of once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's very much the same for meeting one of us supposed neurotypical, so we all have our own little quirky things going on. But really understanding that we're gifted with the ability to interact with each other as individuals. And I really think, God's got some really interesting things that he's pointing out here about taking the individual person and really getting to know the individual person. So autism spectrum is as Swiss cheese. Well, if you look at a number of different, a number of slices of Swiss cheese, it's all Swiss cheese, but the holes are in different places. And the holes are different sizes. So that should give you a little bit of an idea as to what we're looking at here. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Anything that Danielle didn't pick on, I'll elaborate on. Insistence on sameness, resistance to change, those transition pieces are really difficult. Difficulty expressing needs, that whole piece around advocacy has to be taught. Repeats words or phrases, echolalia, particularly in younger kids, that's part of that developing speech, but where you want to get to is instead of just walking in saying, hello, how are you, and have the child repeat, hello, how are you, you need to get that reciprocal piece where you're actually creating conversation. But this is not an unusual thing to see in kids that have an autism diagnosis. Emotional swings for no apparent reason, okay? Reasons for emotional swings could be I'm overwhelmed, could be the projector noise is bothering me, could be the the frequency is vibrating so much that I can't think straight. All of my sensory pieces are on overload and I can't deal with it. It also could be your perfume. It also could be you're talking too fast. It also could be, like I was told by my daughter, I move too much when I talk. And she can either watch me or she can listen to me. She can't do both at the same time. So looking at some of these behaviors that we're seeing, you've got to really kind of be a detective about what is causing the behaviors. And we've got some really great stories. I'm hoping to be able to get to them. Prefers to be alone, may resist interaction. Particularly, you've got kids that'll do the parallel play, but not necessarily the interactive play. Meltdowns, Danielle already did that one quite well. Difficulty participating with others, again, parallel play preferences and the whole issue around social and how difficult that is. My daughter can do social at a party for about 2 hours, and then she needs to go take a nap for 5 hours because it's that exhausting to have to think through the things that we just do automatically. Very difficult. Prefers little or no physical affection, and that was one of those things that I said, my daughter can't possibly have autism. She loves being cuddled and hugged. Well, who knew? Her particular mode of sensory processing was that she needed those big squeezes, the joint compressions, and that was something because of what the physical therapist will tell you is that the large joint compressions will release endorphins, which make you feel better because endorphins are hitting your brain in a different place, and that can help calm you down for some persons on the autism spectrum. Little or no eye contact, again, that could be because I can listen to you, but I can't watch you at the same time. I can tell when someone on the spectrum has glanced up at me, I'm on their radar, they know what I'm saying, they're paying attention, but to the outside world it doesn't look like they're paying attention. So kind of developing a sense about how each individual takes in information. Unresponsive to normal teaching methods, sometimes. So sometimes that means we have to get a little creative. So let's see what we can do about being creative. Okay, sustained odd play, that's lining up the trains or the cars instead of doing this on the floor and going room, 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 running the car across the carpet. Inappropriate attachments to objects. Again, apparent over or under sensitivity to pain or other sensations. There was one scenario where my daughter was out in our backyard playing on a brand new swing set that was one of those wooden, back in the days when we did the pressure-treated lumber swing sets, and the slide had the wood down the sides of the slide. And so she's out running around barefoot having a high old time. We bring her inside. She's got splinters all up and down the sides of her feet. My husband and I are looking at each other saying, okay, great, how are we going to deal with this? We pulled the splinters out and she giggled the whole time. So unusual responses to physical stimuli. Temple Grandin, who knows Temple Grandin? Oh, yay! Temple Grandin tells a story in one of her books about how Sundays were the most dreadful thing in the world, because back in the 40s or 50s when she was going to Sunday school, you would wear those petticoats with the scratchy tulle fabric, I think is what it's called, and it would scratch her legs, and she just could not bear it, and she'd have meltdown because of the sensory overload of what was going on. And it wasn't until her mother figured out that it was this petticoat that was the problem, that we couldn't get Temple to church. So that gives you a few clues as to pain or sensations or sensory issues. No real fear of danger, I think, because there's not a real perception of sequencing and understanding of, if I do this, then this could happen. My daughter would play in her dress-up clothes on those green plastic high-heeled shoes with the princess outfit that's, dragging on the floor, and she's walking across the tops of the radiators right next to the windows, oblivious. Or on the top of the jungle gym, just watching the rest of the world go by, and I can't even get at her because she's up too high. Not really tuned into what the potential for danger is. You could have noticeable overactivity or underactivity. So some of these kids have a little more hyperness to them. You can also have kids that are bolters, little kids in particular. And Sammy, my daughter, was really fast. You'd put her down and she was gone, and you would be an all-out sprint and just about not be able to catch her. So that's something that anyone who is dealing with a classroom of kids needs to be aware, that it's real easy to have one of these kids bolt. The school she went to for first grade lost her. That was an interesting conversation. Uneven gross and fine motor skills. Gross motor skills, big movements, and fine motor skills, little things with little pieces, beads, pen, crayons, whatever. Sammy really, really liked to draw, but discovered that she really was not interested in crayons because it did not give her enough control. So we finally got to the point where it was the colored pencils. And to this day, you'll see later, she has gotten some real nice development there because we found the right thing for her. Not responsive to verbal cues, may seem deaf. That frequently is one of the first things parents see, is that we have that issue of that potential for deafness, and that's one of the things that the diagnostic process will look to rule out. Sammy has a 30% hearing loss in one of her ears, which if we hadn't been looking for it, we would have never found it. Not responsive to nonverbal cues, which Danielle already touched on, and not responsive to social cues, same thing. Okay. This is like my favorite picture, this little old lady. And I put her on autism myths because the top one, autism is caused by bad parenting. It is so not. But I think every congregation has someone who might kind of fit this hat a little bit. And she may not realize that it's her perfume that's causing this kid's problems. Autism is just an excuse for unruly children to choose not to behave. Oh, that I wish that that was the case. No, unfortunately, it's not. Children with autism do not speak sometimes, and I will tell you that my daughter was one who had 150 word vocabulary at 18 months, lost language. She was down to about 10 words, and now we can't shut her up. So it waxes and wanes, guess what? Just like the rest of us. Though there is about 20% of the population that has issues with speech production. Therefore, you do have some kids, some adults, some individuals on the autism spectrum that don't speak. A lot of augmentative communication tools for that. People with autism do not want friends? Oh, yes, they do. The problem is they don't know how to do it. And it's almost like the same way that you would teach an individual how to write. You do that hand over hand, but you have to do a quote-unquote hand-over-hand technique in order to teach how to make friends. That's exhausting. It's doable, but it's exhausting. Danielle's laughing at me.
I'm not laughing.
People with autism cannot develop a spiritual life. Yes, they can. That is a myth. Okay. So,
touch on the vaccine project.
you know, God love Donald Trump. He brought it right back up again. Okay. Here's what I have to say about that. There is no correlation, no clinically discovered correlation between vaccines and the onset of autism spectrum disorders. Because we have ramped up the vaccine schedule to the extent that we have, and many of those vaccines take place in that span of age, there has been a lot of conversation about that. Now, is it a good idea that we took the mercury out of the vaccines? Absolutely. I don't want to shoot my child full of mercury. Is it a good idea to you having your child into the doctor's office for the to diagnose an ear infection, and the doctor says, "Oh, well, you have to be in next week for the next round of vaccine. Why don't we just get that out of the way?" No, not a good idea when the child's immune system is already compromised to introduce something else that the immune system has to fight off. So we need to be smart about how we do vaccines. Now, there was one documented case of an individual who had a mitochondrial disorder, which I couldn't even explain that to you if I had to. But, there was some very specific situation where, yes, it was vaccine injury, okay? There are vaccine injuries that occur. However, the rate of autism at 1 in 68, and it's actually 1 in 50 in school-age kids, so, the tsunami is still going here. There is no way that it could be all vaccine that has injured these kids. There are some parents that swear that this is what happened. That is anecdotal information. I would also want to know, okay, what else was going on with this kid? Were there other illnesses? Did we do something not right? I don't know. But as far as the autism vaccine connection, it's been pretty much,
Debunked.
Yeah. Thank goodness for Ben Carson, who came up and said, I think you need to get your facts straight when Mr. Trump suggested that vaccine and autism were connected.
But you didn't put it up there as one of the enemies.
No, because it usually, we get into this big, because there are some people who are really rabid about vaccines, and it's like, you know what? It's it's really, you have to look at these things on an individual basis. You've got one case where the government has said, yeah, it was vaccine injury. But I think at this point we've pretty well exhausted what that is. I think there are a number of other things to look at, so it's like, okay, we'll keep this in the back of our minds, but we're not really seeing that as the large piece. I think what Danielle talked about as far as there being a genetic component and then potentially some other environmental or other assaults and we don't know what those are at this point. If I knew that, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be laying on a beach because I'd be a real wealthy woman. And I'd take you with me. Yeah. So anyway, so looking at framework for ministry development, because that's really what we want to talk about here. Now that we have a little bit broader understanding of what it is that we're working with, and you're working with some of those challenging behaviors and pieces of symptomology from a very young age to an older age. Autism is a lifetime disorder. That doesn't mean that you don't grow through certain pieces of it and learn to do things better. When I first met Temple Grandin 15, 20 years ago, she was a completely different person than when I saw her 3 years ago, because she still keeps growing. Guess what? We all do that, don't we? You can't teach old dogs new tricks. We're living proof of that. So I think it's important to understand that you're going to see pieces of that. You're not necessarily going to see all of it. So first and foremost, and I think you've probably done lots and lots of study on that this weekend, is opening and welcoming. You need to have some outreach. There's a lot of families out there who are just afraid to even come across the threshold of a church. Open and ongoing communication, and I'm talking about, when I talk about parents or caregivers, obviously those are going to be people that you need to be supporting as well, and letting them know that you've got programs or supports or care or some sort of ministry that shows to the parents, to the people that would be bringing these children or suggesting to teens or adults that they come to the church. Usually there is a someone. Not all of the adults on the autism spectrum are as advocacy-minded as some other people in this room that we know. So understanding that kind of communication is going to be really helpful. Communication of curriculum concepts. Something as simplistic as God loves you. That's the general concept that we want to get across. And so that those, whatever that it is that you're trying to get across, you let people who are with the student or the individual, I'm going to use parents just for the sake of argument. So you let the parents know what's going on so that you've got the learning going on more than just what's in your classroom. Parents also really good resources, we'll get to that later, but really good resources for helping you get through some of the difficult pieces in behavior with some of these kids. Developmentally appropriate placement. That doesn't mean that the child that's in a 6th grade class necessarily needs to be in with the other 6th graders. You do it in terms of where the development is, and obviously that's something that needs to be worked out with the parents as well. But you want to teach to the level as opposed to teach to the chronological age. A system of follow-up so that you can make adjustments to whatever your game plan is. Involving the student if possible. That's really obviously important as you get into the adult population, but students really like to know what's going on and what it is that they're supposed to be learning. So if you have a planning meeting of some sort, that would be a helpful thing to do. Mentoring and building relationships, again, Danielle talked about that. I think, again, with the adult population more so, who may not get as much from a group Bible study as they might from a one-on-one type of an experience, both would be great. But really having, and I think probably the building relationship piece is really an important concept to take away from this. Be prepared to learn as much as you teach, because it's not all about just giving to this community, because they give back, and they give back in ways that are really surprising. Looking to use parents as partners. This is really kind of directed more at parents. So do we have any parents? Okay, good. So looking for faith communities that's in line with your family beliefs. You don't just go to the Baptist church because they have a really good youth group. You need to be able to be a participant in that community, not just drop your kid off on Saturday night and then pick them back up. Promote open and ongoing communication, being honest about particular issues. I have had parents sign up their kid for VBS, drop them off the first day of VBS and say, oh, by the way, he has autism. Bye, see you in 3 hours. That's not a good way to create partnerships in actually helping your kids. Being sure that safety and health issues specific to your child are recognized. If you've got a bolter, teachers need to know that. So if you're a teacher, you may want to ask parents that question. Recognize that parents' hands-on participation may be necessary. Sometimes you may run into a scenario where it's going to be a good idea to have the parent in a classroom so that you can have modeled for yourself what the best approach is in teaching this particular child, because nobody knows these kids like their parents do. Faith-based communities, and this is again addressed to parents, but good for you guys to know as well. Faith-based communities are not school systems. They are not required to make accommodations for your child, but many of them want to. And quite honestly, the want to piece can really be much more advantageous than the have to, like the school systems. Be creative, be flexible, be prepared for the inevitable bump in the road, and really being able to reevaluate what you've got in mind in terms of what you're teaching. So, not all teaching has to do with curriculum, okay? Oh my gosh, really. Teaching social skills is really talking about relationships. So I'm going to zip through some of these because I have, okay, I've got that. We did. Okay, ministry strategies. I do want to touch on this, especially in the language of Scripture, timelines, and concepts. Okay, and looking at what is the cognitive level of the individual that we're talking about. Okay, so here we've got a common phrase that we use, our God is a rock. So this is what my daughter drew. Understanding that if you're using idioms or expressions or anything like that, it's going to be taken very, very literally. So your language needs to be a little more, well, I think that's self-explanatory.
Can I insert something here?
Yes.
I had a mother, I work with families, a mother whose child, autistic child, kept attempting suicide, and came to the fact that the Sunday school teacher kept saying, life will be so much better in heaven.
Okay.
So I just thought needed to insert that.
Yeah.
You can answer that one, Kim.
It's not a question, I'm just saying, we gotta watch the life.
Yeah. Being aware of what concepts you're trying, and yes, things will be so much better in heaven, but that's up to God to make that decision when that happens. And in the meantime, here's what we've got here, and we've got Jesus here with us, and then yes, things will be difficult, but with that help. Timelines. My daughter drew baby Jesus with the pacifier in his mouth on the cross, and I'm like, what are you thinking? When's Jesus born? December. When's Easter?
Oh, March, April.
Okay, how old's Jesus?
Yeah, 3 months.
Okay, that's where we got that from. Timelines, really, really helpful. Visuals, again, using other means of getting information. If you're familiar with Gardner's 8 intelligences, that's something that educators probably familiar with. Look to get the message in through every available portal, whether it's ears or eyes or smell or physical or art or music or whatever mode possible. Visuals for this community tend to be pretty dramatic. Breaking concepts down into small pieces. Gardner's 8 intelligences using multisensory. Nonverbal social cues will not be understood. Use timeouts as constructive detoxifiers. That's that, okay, I need space, let me go sit in one of the beanbag chairs. That's something that could be really helpful. Voice modulation. My daughter told me my voice is too high-pitched, so I have been trying very hard to talk at a little lower register, which is very difficult. Inappropriate social behavior, and you want to counter that with nurturing social interactions. That's where I'm talking about before about the whole concept of relationship and learning how to treat each other. And that's where God loves us, God wants us to treat each other kindly, and you put that whole manners piece in there, that's going to be helpful. But the whole socially appropriate types of things, that all has to be taught piece by piece. Don't assume. Here's your thing. Makes an ass out of you and me, okay? Be curious. Be a detective. Okay, I'm going to let you guys, this is all in the handouts I gave you. And I'm going to go back. Okay, ministering to the family. Again, being open and welcoming. That's going to be really important. Be respectful of the diagnosis, whatever the diagnosis is, and the family's journey through the grieving process. Some people go through it in a week, like I did, and some people it takes years. And some people get into that big river in Egypt. Denial. And that makes it really, really difficult. I had a pastor who had a son, and people were coming to me saying, Kim, can you do anything? I'm like, I'm the scariest person that this guy could see coming at this point because I know too much. He needs to come to this. He's a smart guy. He needs to come to this understanding on his own. It took him till his kid was 8 before he got it. And then all of a sudden, it was like the light bulb went off. But you need to be respectful of each individual's capacity to deal with this. Be there, listen. Discern the needs of all family members. Okay, I have a story I'm going to tell you in a second. Watch for opportunities to be accommodating. Providing for needs is ministry. Don't forget the youth and adults with special needs. Okay, so I've got Miss Dorothy in my church. Miss Dorothy has been my friend for forever. Miss Dorothy was Sammy's first Sunday school teacher. Miss Dorothy will show up on my porch unannounced and say to my husband and I, you guys are going out for dinner and a movie tonight. Goodbye, Sammy and I have things to do. That ministered to me so wonderfully, just the fact that someone would come and give my husband and I some space, because this diagnosis is 24/7 and you are on your toes all the time. And it's not until Sammy is 26 years old, she is home by herself with a cell phone, which of course I have mine turned off so she could be texting me and I wouldn't know about it. And Dad is teaching at the local college this morning. So she's home by herself. She's probably sleeping. But we've come a long way from, it being that much 24/7. Yes, sir.
I love time with Q&A because both you, Danielle, Kim, you're just so
I'm
helpful,
going to,
and I'm sure there's some questions.
okay, yeah. I'm going to go through this. That's Sammy. I'll leave her up. This is just a quote from Bill Gaventa, A Place for All Faith, Communities, and Disability. He's listed on the resources page. But really looking at this that we're really looking to create that safe community. And like I said, you will be surprised if you get involved with the autism community or with any of those with disabilities, just how much they will give back to you. When Sammy reads scripture on Sunday mornings, the whole congregation is silent listening to her. So, questions?
Thank you, both of you.
Yes.
How do you deal with the little old ladies?
Roll my eyes, bite my tongue. No.
Because we have a very, very small congregation, but I know that we do have a lot of older people. And it's hard to get through to them because they don't want to know that there's a problem, or they don't want to know that they need to be nicer, or more.
Or understanding.
I think that's it.
Well, I think really education is the key. And so if you have someone come into your congregation, you're in Connecticut?
Yes.
I'm in Connecticut. If you have someone come into your congregation who's willing to talk about the realities of it and gently and socially appropriately target some of those persons so that they, who knew? It's really this kind of thing. I want to do this for the entire congregation. It's not just the teachers that need it. It's not just the parents of the special needs kids. It's the whole community. And I've been at this for 10 years with a program like this, and that's really what's going to make the difference. What do you think?
I actually had a moment where I was stimming with knitting needles a while back at a UU congregation, and someone had the idea to turn around during fellowship, and I'll demonstrate with Kim. Hi, I'm so-and-so. Your knitting needles are bothering me. Can you please stop? And then she turned right back around. So I actually agree with Kim that I kind of bit my tongue because I could say a few things at that point. But since it was Sunday at a UU church, I just smiled and went, "May you never have to live with autism."
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to just bite my tongue. And if I have the opportunity to talk to someone, I will. But I tend to talk to someone first just to make sure that my language usage is not going to, let's say, insult someone.
You ever see The Wizard of Oz? In the beginning scene where Miss Gulch comes in and she's taking Toto away, and the Aunt Em says, "I'd like to give you a piece of my mind, but being a good Christian woman, I just can't." That's the philosophy.
Yep. Andrew, if you can't say nothing nice, don't say
There
it.
you go. Excellent. Okay, next question. Yes.
I could just give respond to that too, because I have a son who has a diagnosis of autism, and I've just found that if there's opportunities for people to share their stories, those are really powerful. So a few times I've had a chance to share how painful it can be when people judge you, and what it's like to be a parent of a child with autism, and I found that has made more of a profound impact on people than anything else.
I'd have to agree with that, and I think, again, my church group, I belong to Trinity Baptist Church in New Haven, and they have had no choice. They've had to focus on anybody with autism because they've got me there. But I have been utilized, because I am very outspoken about this, I've been utilized by the women's groups or whatever group to come and talk about my faith and how this diagnosis was impacted and what happened, and how is God using this. And I think to have that kind of support, and what you're talking about is really kind of a support groupy thing. What a great ministry for a church. You have no money? Great. Have a support group. Cost you whatever it costs for cookies.
Yep.
Coffee.
And coffee.
And coffee.
Always remember the coffee. Michael?
Yes. We have a few autistic people in our church, and we know that out in the community there are many, many more, and if we were more intentional about what we wanted to do, I'm sure we would have more in our church. And yet I think it's hard to get people to be intentional about this because they know so little. I think you two are amazing, and I think the material you presented is really amazingly useful for the congregation to hear. But it leaves, I think if we were to give them this material, actually present it in some way, or have you guys present it to them somehow, it would give them a lot of information that would say, I now know a little bit more that I could do. And I'm not as uncomfortable with this idea of being intentional anymore. But I think the one part that leaves, still probably leaves more to be discussed is the meltdown part. The part where, how do we deal with a meltdown? And in church or in around church.
So I'm gonna answer this.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I can speak for adults because I started having more meltdowns once I moved out of my parents' house because my mother was kind of the buffer of meltdowns for me, and she could tell when I was having it. As an adult, I know myself what to do. But I do find when I have meltdowns, a lot of people want to come comfort me and want to be with me and make sure that I'm okay. At the same time, I can't have that because I have people watching me when I'm having a meltdown, and it's very, very self-conscious for me to have someone watch me cry and walk back and forth and not be able to control what's going on. It's very embarrassing and humiliating for me to have a meltdown at the stunning age of 28. So what I would actually suggest is that if you know someone is having a meltdown, one, let them know beforehand where they can go to have a meltdown in a private place. And if you see someone at that point having a meltdown, wait, let's say about a half hour, and go in and see how they're doing, and ask them, do you need water? Do you need something to eat? Do you need someone to talk to? If you know they're on anxiety medication, I'm on anxiety medication right now. Do you need your medication? And not say it in a way that you're trying to fix the issue, but ask them, what do they need right now? Because I have found with my meltdowns, I'm either, there's a HALT thing, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that is used in recovery. For me, it's hungry, anxious, lonely, tired. So if one of those four things are out of whack, I'm more sustainable to having that meltdown. So it's always good to give people space, because coming up, and I'm going to demonstrate, hi Kim, how are you? Are you okay? Why are you crying? I am going to swing my arm out and go, leave me the heck alone, lady. And then that's harder to rebound afterwards, going, I apologize for smacking you in the face when I was having a meltdown. I'm sorry I made you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. I would add to that, I would just,
I have to do some other
go
stuff.
ahead.
Yes.
We'll entertain them.
Yeah.
I would add to that is that sometimes it's not necessarily just the anxiety piece. My daughter, for instance, we found that there were a lot of foods that she was eating that caused behavioral reactions. And once we were able to find out what those were, take them out. She's gluten and casein free for 20 years at this point. And that has made a huge difference in her capacity to modulate herself.
That can help with
So-
some autistic individuals.
Some.
Yeah.
And I would say, just if it's a child, you just have to ask the parents. Don't assume you can go and try to comfort the child. Just like you couldn't go comfort Danielle. Look, you need to get in contact with the parents
Yes.
wherever they are.
Yeah.
If they're in church and you're in Sunday school.
Right.
Right.
And
They
that's why
want
when
to
you're
let-
talking,
they want to know.
when you're
Yes.
when you're talking with those parents and bringing that student into your Sunday school class environment or whatever it is you're bringing them into, that's why talking to the parents is really important. So what do I do? Knowing that there's a real good chance you're going to face this, what do I do? Is physical activity a helpful thing? Sometimes it can be swinging. That was one of my daughter's favorites. Or scooter boards. And be able to have someone in your classroom that's almost a one-on-one but a shadow maybe.
Yeah.
So that if you get into that scenario where you have to move that child so that they're not disrupting the whole rest of the class, or in order to help them calm themselves. To have that additional person around to help is going to be helpful. Okay? Other hands, yes.
One of the things I've learned first with adults is to help them get out of the space as fast as possible. And having mentors assigned to build relationships, it's hard to trust. With adults, many times there have been so many traumas in their life, they really do begin to have emotional disorders because of their trauma. And they don't trust everybody. So finding a way to give them the space to save face is important.
Right.
But taking things as matter-of-factly as possible. Not making everything bigger than it already is. Just, some kids.
No, sir, I'm not.
Meltdowns.
No, sir.
Not just autistic kids.
Right.
He said I'm not
Right.
preaching today.
A lot of the behaviors that these kids do
I'm just an
aren't
audio-visual
typical
guy.
behaviors. It's just a matter of they do, it's like behavior extreme.
Well, the reason why I put a Justin for because I'm not the preacher.
Thank you.
This is just a real simple question, but we have a
Yes,
small-
sir. Yes, sir.
we have a
You see how
small-
distracting that is? That's like what it's like with someone who has autism, when
Boom.
there's just like a little fan or something like that. Oh, yay. A little fan or something.
Okay.
You can't, yeah, are you better now? You can't, you don't have the filtering system, and that's what it's like. It's really hard.
Okay, we have a very
Yes.
small congregation. We have 2 men in their early
Go
30s
check it.
who
Woo.
live with their
You
families.
know about that.
And I'm not sure that one has ever been diagnosed autistic. I know the other one has, but to the family it seems like an incomplete diagnosis. But anyway, I have this desire to help them be more involved, and yet I don't know whether that's best. I know not to hug them.
Okay.
Do you think, how do you feel if I came up, I always speak, and they always speak back. Is it okay to touch the hand, or should I just not touch? There's no need for me to touch.
We can tell her what we did when you walked in the room, and I said, "Oh, Danielle, how are you? Can I hug you?"
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would never
That-
hug them, but,
Well, that helps just to ask if you can touch them.
okay.
I know that sounds like you're really having to simplify everything, but when I get touched by someone unexpectedly, it feels like my skin is burning.
Okay.
It
okay.
feels okay. That is so friggin' annoying. It feels like my skin is burning when someone is touching me. And any energy, like when I hugged Kim, I felt her energy because I have a very strong empathy. So when I hugged Kim, it was like, oh, wow, I'm feeling all of her energy right now. And okay. Unless I actually initiate and I know the person really well, I'm going to feel everything you're feeling.
Okay.
So it can sometimes be painful, and I have one to get antiseptic for my hands afterwards. I did chaplaincy at the hospital for a clinical pastoral education class, and at some point in the ICU, someone came up and hugged me after I gave chaplaincy, and I was basically standing there going, okay, thank you. I'm sorry so-and-so is sick. Can I get you something else, or can you go back to my room now? So it's always good to ask, just ask, because they're going to appreciate it. I appreciate when Kim asked me, because
I learned it the hard way,
it's
though.
I love everybody so much, but I love you at a distance, and smiling, going, hi. Eventually, you're going to find when people get comfortable with you, they're going to want to hug you, eventually. But it takes a while. They're eventually going to be okay and coming up and doing, hi,
Clearly, it didn't take her long.
But it's taken me 3 or 4 months an average to get to that point with anyone.
I said I learned the hard way. When I was relatively new to this, like within the first year or so, I went to an autism conference. And there, of course, was a speaker from the spectrum, as we call them now. And he was surrounded by people trying to get his attention, and he was swung this way, and there was a break in the conversation, and I'm gonna touch you. And I did this. And he goes, ow! And I'm like, oh no, what did I do? That was my first introduction to the whole sensory thing and how really sensitive some of these folks are. So
Does
yeah,
it make
ask
you
first.
feel more a part of a congregation if they ask you to do a job or ask you, give you choice of a job that you might want to do?
Yes.
Because one of these guys was a deacon. I'm in a disciples church.
Yeah.
He was a deacon for a while, and they pass out communion.
Yeah.
And we had friends coming, one of whom was Catholic, who didn't want to take communion with us, and was embarrassed and made nervous when he would. So I or somebody told him, I can't remember who, just don't hand it to, don't put the tray out in front of that person. And that bothered him enough that he quit being a deacon.
Because it's a routine that he has learned, and he didn't understand why he couldn't. He
him.
thought he was doing something wrong by doing that.
Right. So,
And did that person sit in a different place every time communion was? Because then that's disorienting.
For me, I really appreciate, after I kept handing out bulletins, everyone thought after my minister retired that that's what I was good for. Outside of the community, I facilitate groups. I get chaplain training. I'm going into ministry school. So I eventually had to sit down with my senior minister and go, listen, Peter, I have this, and that going on. I have a business degree. I'm not an idiot. I do data management for a job. And at that point, he wanted to know, what did I want to do at the church? What was my focus? So really ask and just not assume that, they can do this, because honestly, and I think Kim will agree, people with autism have these amazing gifts that can blow your mind and go, how the heck did you do that? I don't know what you're doing, but it's working.
Well, these guys are both brilliant on their computers and out of sight.
I pick up databases like this.
I think one of the things many people with autism feel a lot of anxiety, and a lot of it is feeling like there's a lot of things that are hard to control.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trying to understand what's happening socially and sensory, and so when people are given choices about things, that helps them feel a lot more.
If you need to leave, that's okay. I'm good for a while yet. I have another appointment to go to, so I'm available. But if you have to leave, please.
Yeah, so that helps people feel a lot more in control.
I have
they
a
have
son
choices.
who's 21 has Asperger's. He's actually in college.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned about what happens when